Greetings, friends. As promised, I have a story for you which stood out to me in the sea of messages that is my inbox. Every story is important, but something about this one made me stop everything to bring it to you as soon as possible. Stay tuned to the end of the video for a special announcement. Open your mind for just a moment, and come with me, my friend. Hello, Mr. X. My name is Mir. We had a short conversation a while back, in the comments of your Afghan werewolf video. I was the one talking about dreaming of wolves. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to my story. You happen to be the first soul I've ever spoken to about the events I'm going to describe. So I've compiled a list of things that have been happening throughout my family's history, mainly on my mother's side, trying to find answers as to what's been happening to me. I don't know if I'm just desperate for answers, for the mere sake of closure, or if I'm trying to prove that it's all in my head. No matter how much I try to rationalize what's been going on, I can never bring myself to say that it's just my imagination running wild. I was hoping maybe you could help me with that. Before I get into what ails me now, please bear with me while I explain what I believe to be the origin of this whole ordeal. My mother told me of her family, the simple lives they led in a rural city in Panama, Central America. Her father, my grandfather, told her many stories about his life as a farmer, but there was one thread that stands out in her memory to this day. She said the reason it stood out was because her father was clearly traumatized by the events. She could see the stress and pain in his eyes as he told it. They lived on a big farm surrounded by large open fields, lined by woods, long before modern conveniences came into town. They got their water from a river about a mile's hike away, and they had about 5 neighbors, spread throughout an area of a few miles. Even though the houses were relatively far apart, they still had get-togethers when they could. Everyone knew each other and they were all pretty social. At some point, people started noticing large numbers of livestock going missing or turning up dead. As bizarre as it may sound, the gossip that started to spread among the neighborhood was that there was a woman who lived in the forest and could change her shape, taking the form of an animal. The community's rumor mill churned on, talking about how the woman could take the form of any animal she chose, but preferred that of a large wolf. They said that she came at night and killed goats and cattle. One day, my grandfather was tending to some crops when he saw someone approaching him from far off in the distance, about 50 or so meters away. He thought it was a bit strange since it was almost sundown, and he figured most people would be inside by then, if they weren't still working their own fields. Suspicious, he decided to keep an eye on the trespasser. The figure appeared to be headed toward Grandpa's barn, so he went to try to intercept them. As he drew closer, he could make out the vague outline of a woman. It was then that he realized she was moving much faster than he thought, and was going to beat him to the barn. He ran to cut her off on the other side. He rounded the corner and was bowled over at the sight of an unusually large, growling wolf where the woman trespasser should have been. The shock was so great that his body seized up and he fell backwards as the creature charged, leaping over him with a single bound. He said the wolf ran toward the tree line on the opposite side of the property at an impossible speed. My grandfather was shaken by the incident, but it was not over for him. Almost every day afterward, the monstrous wolf would visit the farm. At first, my grandpa would see it staring silently from the tree line. Eventually, it began making its way closer to the barn, even sometimes approaching the house. He tried his best to keep it away, but whenever my grandpa came out to challenge it, gun in hand, the creature was nowhere to be seen. He set traps for it around the property, but would find them activated and mysteriously empty. One evening, my grandpa came home to find every single one of his goats had been slaughtered and haphazardly piled up in one corner of their pen. That, for him, was the last straw. He yelled out curses and threats toward the tree line all night as he cleaned up, a task which took him several hours. That same night, not long after he got to bed, exhausted, he was awakened by a sudden noise. The sound of his young daughter, my aunt, echoed through the halls as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes. My aunt was at his bedroom door, banging as hard as she could. My grandfather grabbed his rifle from the closet and stormed out the back door to search for the monster. When he finally saw the silhouette that was clawing at the doors of his home, he says he hesitated for a moment. As hard as he stared at the figure, he could barely tell whether it was animal or human. In fact, he admits that it looked more like a human form hunched over than that of a wolf. With only seconds to react, he had to make the call and take the shot. His aim was true, and the round hit the creature squarely in the leg, but something was wrong. The wolf screamed out in pain, but its voice was more like that of a wounded woman than a common predatory animal. What happened next is what, I believe, still haunts my grandpa to this day. The shadow turned its large head towards him and cast upon him a gaze of utter, overwhelming hatred. From its mouth came something resembling Spanish words that dripped with the same animosity that could be felt through its eyes. The beast then stood up and sprinted off into the woods at blinding speed, despite its seemingly grave leg injury. Grandpa says that he saw an old woman wandering down a trail weeks later. She looked eerily similar to the one he first saw on his property, except with a severe limp in her left leg. No one knows exactly what the creature said to my grandpa that night, but he seems convinced it was some sort of curse. A lot of bad things happened in the weeks that followed that had the townsfolk baffled. Sudden crop failures, pets and livestock getting sick, among other things. My aunt, the one who woke my grandfather up that night, passed away in a car accident sometime later. Now, I'll get to some of the things that have been happening to me. Ever since I was young, I've had this recurring dream several times a year. It begins with me being in the middle of a forest. The air is deadly silent, and the woods around me are steeped in darkness. The whole time I feel like I'm being watched, followed, with an intense need to escape something, but I don't exactly know what. I try to run, but I can't move. Suddenly, I look around and see these sets of glowing amber eyes staring at me from every direction. And that's when I wake up. The strange thing is that the feeling of being watched even follows me into the real world. I get the exact same experience whenever I'm in the woods in real life, despite the fact that I've been camping and hiking many times with nothing going wrong, other than one particular incident. Back in 2013, I went on a 3-day camping trip in Oregon, a place called the Cascade Locks. I was with my mom, my uncle, and 2 cousins. I have so many great memories from that trip, but there's one that I wish I could forget. It was dark. We had a fire going with s'mores and the whole deal. I had to step away for a moment to relieve myself near some trees, not too far from the fire spot, but far enough where no one would hear me. As I made my way there, that familiar feeling of dread began to creep down my spine. My ears perked up, and I realized that I couldn't hear anything at all, not even the crickets that were so loud before. By the time I finished up, I was turning around to head back to the fire and everyone else when I heard my mom calling me.
Mir? Baby?
For a moment, I felt somewhat relieved to finally hear something in all that deafening silence, but my relief was suddenly stomped out when I realized the voice was coming from the wrong direction. The call repeated itself.
Mir? Baby?
The exact same sound, tone, and everything. This time, I was positive it was coming from deeper in the woods, the opposite direction from where I knew my mom was. I still had to do a double take because the voice sounded so authentic, but I told myself it couldn't possibly have been her. I knew she was back at the campfire. I'm not afraid to admit that I ran as fast as I could to get back to the campsite. That incident ruined my mood for the whole last day of the trip, needless to say, but I didn't bother telling anyone. I didn't want to put a damper on anyone else's time. It was hard enough for me just getting the odd looks from everyone when I came back to the fire, being clearly out of breath and visibly shaken. Ever since then, odd things have continued to happen to me and the people around me. My dog, who was in perfect health, suddenly died with no known cause. The vet couldn't verify what went wrong with him. My family and I lost our home to a fire, and mysterious illnesses have struck several of my family members. My grandmother passed away this year, right after an open-heart surgery that went off without any issues. She was expected to make a full recovery. My mom was even with her, but went out for a bit since she was doing so well, only to get a call minutes later, telling her to come back right away because Grandma was fading rapidly. I left work and came to the hospital, and we stayed with her until about 1 a.m. when she finally passed. Neither the doctors nor the coroner could determine the cause of her sudden, rapid decline. I wondered why so many bizarre tragedies had befallen my family. Less than a week after my grandmother died, I went on a business trip to Utah. Driving on my way back, I finally saw something that caused me to connect the dots and form a theory as to what might be going on. As the sun was setting on a lonely interstate, I caught a glimpse of a pair of shimmering eyes in the distance, just off the side of the road. Being a bit superstitious, I slowed down a little to confirm what I was seeing. The same exact amber eyes I remember from my dream stared back at me, along with the dark silhouette of a body. As I neared the creature, expecting to have a bit of a laugh at what was hopefully just a coyote, I could see the overly large, hulking frame of a wolf-like beast. It was pitch black, hunched over, almost as if it was somehow deformed, but its eyes were trained on me, focused. As my truck sped along the road, I could see the ears on the top of its head. They were sharp and close together, pointed straight upward like a Doberman. Before I could analyze it any further, I saw its body jerk awkwardly before darting off, and something hit my windshield as if thrown at me by the monster. I screamed reflexively and floored it, speeding away as fast as I could. All I could think was, what kind of dog or wolf could throw things like that? In the midst of my panic, I felt a short laugh escape my mouth as I felt my sanity slipping away with it. With no other way of getting peace of mind, I decided to visit a local psychic. She was going to give me a palm reading, but as soon as she made contact with my hands, she rudely shoved me away and demanded that I leave. I'll never forget the look on her face. It was like that of a deer in headlights. She told me that something dark was following me, and that she wanted no part of it. This left me feeling completely hopeless. I have no idea what I'm dealing with here. However, to be honest, being able to share this story with someone as open-minded as you, and the people who listen to you, has lightened my burden a bit. I'm honestly scared of what might happen to me and the remaining members of my family. If this thing ever finds me, I don't know what I'll do. Thanks for listening, Mr. X. Mir. Greetings, friends. I hope you enjoyed the story. I want to thank Mir for taking the time and showing the courage to reach out to me and let me know what was going on in this tragic history of his family. I found the account both extremely sad and fascinating at the same time from a paranormal standpoint. I hope that his days of being tormented by whatever this was are long gone. Mir, I recommend that you do whatever you can to avoid being helpless, being a victim of any sort. Regardless of whether or not you face a supernatural threat that can attack you physically or strike at your health, learning how to defend yourself physically and keeping your body in the best condition possible will only serve to maximize your chances of living a long, happy, healthy life. Train yourself in every way you can manage, my friend, and that includes mental and spiritual training as well, whatever you determine that to mean for yourself. That advice actually extends to all my listeners, my dreamers. As I wrote this story, based on the information that I got from Mir, I couldn't help but wonder who the old woman in the woods might have been. I understand that she appears to be what's called a skinwalker, a creature of Navajo legend imbued with the ability to take on the shapes of animals. But I'm also curious as to her personal history, her story. I wonder what would lead someone to such a life of tormenting and cursing innocent families. I also wonder what she might have whispered to Mir's grandfather. Another thought that occurred to me was how sad it must be to be a goat. I know it sounds funny, but whenever there's a mysterious creature about, skinwalkers, cryptids, or even aliens, it seems like goats are always in for a bad time. There's even a monster whose sole purpose is killing goats, as I'm sure most of you are well aware. If goats could talk, I bet we would know a lot more about the hidden realms of cryptids. One thing that really struck me in this story was the idea of hearing your mom's voice coming from the dark, silent woods in the middle of the night. When you know it's not her, that just shows that something very terrible is actively trying to lure you in. It's a crazy thought when you really take a second. Anyway, as for my announcement, I wanted you guys to know that I've reopened my merch store for the dreamers who wish to represent this community out in the world with some nice designs. Go to teespring.com and search mr.xdreams to see if anything suits your fancy. The store will be open for a while, with orders shipping every 3 days, I believe. Also, just so you know, this video is not sponsored by teespring.com. That just happens to be the service that I use for my apparel. Oh, and spoiler alert. If you send me a picture of yourself wearing anything from my store, you will definitely be featured in one of my videos with some cool Mr. X Dreamer ocular upgrades, if you know what I mean. I know only the most dedicated listeners will probably be the ones who hear this message, so I'm looking forward to seeing those pictures. Thanks so much, my friends, for being who you are, and I want you to know that I am truly grateful to you. I would never have believed anyone would be wearing my designs if you asked me 2 years ago. It's really amazing to think about. So until next time, my friends, stay safe out there. Love you guys. I'm Mr. X, and may your nights be full of dreams. Oh, and by the way, that old lady definitely had something against goats. Today's code word is GOAT. Use it in your comment down below and let me know who the ride or die followers really are. Later.